Hello, everyone. My name is Lydia Smith, and I'm very excited to be part of your course. I'm here to talk a little bit about cemeteries and how that relates to our current culture and seeing how we view death through these spaces. And so I'm going to begin a little bit about why I am interested in that. About a year ago, I was offered this fellowship where I was able to travel around the world for 1 year. And during that time, I was visiting many, many cemeteries. And so this is kind of like a strange thing to want to do, but maybe I can tell you about why I wanted to do that. I am an artist, and when I was in college myself, I was studying art and anthropology. And so anthropology is a study of culture. Some of you may have taken anthropology courses yourself. And when I was doing some of my art, I was taking a lot of influence from the courses in anthropology that I was taking. So cemeteries became very important to me because I was starting to do a drawing session where I was looking at one cemetery and I was just drawing it over and over and over again. And when I started doing that, I was realizing how interesting these spaces are and how they tell us a lot about the people who live in the communities that bury their family members in them. So, through this kind of presentation, I want to tell you a little bit about how you can learn from these spaces and see about um, learn from these spaces and see your popular culture through the cemetery site. The countries that I visited and are kind of going to act as a case study for my presentation were Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Germany, Egypt, France, Spain, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. Now, what's interesting to me is that you can go anywhere in the world and you will find somewhere, you will have to find a different format of burial or a different cemetery. And each space, this is like a necessity for humans. I mean, once everyone dies, so we have to deal with this problem of what we do with people who are deceased. And so there are many different solutions to this, but I mean, the most common one that I was examining were cemeteries. And so some of you may come from different backgrounds or different places and have different stories about a cemetery. And often when I was traveling, I would get all these stories and collect them and figure out that there were different ways of looking at death in different cultures. But these are the places that I visited specifically so we can learn from these specific spaces. And they're from all different continents, and they all have different religions, and they have different climates. And so that's kind of why I chose them. Okay. So I'm going to start by telling you about these different themes that I noticed when I was traveling, and then ways that I would observe the cemeteries and pick up on patterns that I saw and ways that I discovered different attitudes towards death in these different cultures. So maybe I should also talk about the methodology of how I observed these spaces. But a lot of the time when I was traveling, I would stay with host families, or I would try to like live with people and talk with people as much as I could, so that I could, because when you are visiting a cemetery, it's often a silent experience. So I tried to link these moments of walking through spaces with real life interaction with other people and ask them questions. And then a lot of the time I would just be spending many hours during the day walking through the cemetery, maybe sitting on a bench or taking photographs and drawing and taking notes and just trying to be in the site and figure out what that felt like and what the atmosphere was. So now I'm going to go through some pictures and show you what I saw. Okay, the first thing that I noticed, all cemeteries have a very specific organization. So when you're planning a space, like an architecture or anything, there's just these natural patterns that occur. So for example, this is in Cairo, and you can see how Each unit belongs to a different family, and the space kind of has this grid that emerges. Some of them are more chaotic and very different. And for example, this one in Germany is very, very simple and very organized and uniform. Whereas back in Cairo, there's a lot of complexity that emerges, and but they're both essentially planned. Then you also find patterns and organizations in the way that the monuments are built themselves. And so here's just a small detail from a grave in Australia where some of the grid is starting to dissolve because of nature. I mean, it's interesting as well because we want to organize things, but sometimes that's not what nature wants or what the natural course is. But even in death and spaces after after life, we are still looking for some kind of order. This is another moment of architecture in Argentina where the light's going through the side of a wall for a crypt in the basement structure of one of the tombs. And this is another wall of a niche burial site, and that's where coffins are inserted inside. But you can see how everyone gets their own plot, and it's very structured. Here's another example of that in Argentina, and another example. And here is Japan, where everything is also very uniform, and you can also see the patterning and plans. So like when I was traveling, that's one of the first things that kind of emerged to me was that everything was like these grids and squares that were built up in a cemetery. And that tells a lot about the way that we approach this kind of architecture of place, because it's just like a city essentially, because cities are just squares and squares of spaces that each person has their own house and a plot. Well, in death, we also mimic this kind of structuring. This is also Japan, built up on a mountainside. And then more grids. This is also in Australia. And again, nature is kind of taking over the grid. And this is in Sweden. This was designed by someone very specifically, a famous architect. So it's kind of has this these hedges that are dictating the plan. It looks like a garden, but still, even there, it has this strict pattern.